Good. My hands are warmer.
They're better.
They're much better.
They're better.
Okay, good. How are you all doing? Are you all good? So Tim, what can you tell us individuals who are sitting out here and wondering how we can connect with people more effectively? What is the magic to connection, relationships, etc.?
So I always say that, just in my talk there, we talk about the wrong things. So we talk about what we do. So I was just looking at people, if these people were to meet each other at a party, they would say, what's your name? And the second question would be, what do you do? And the what do you do question, then they build a model for that, right? So they go, oh, you're an academic, you're an accountant. And we build up this model for that, which is a stupid conversation, because I don't actually know much about people. So it's about getting past the surface stuff and starting to talk about, what do I talk about is purpose and values. Why are you here? What's most important to you?
So are you saying then in a conversation when I meet somebody, one of the first things could be that I ask them, could be?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do that.
So tell me, where do you live?
But I'm single and don't want all the women to run away from me. It's a very awkward starting conversation. So I think there's times and places. So I think there's times when you sort of just want to have the how was your weekend conversation, and that's perfectly normal. But what often happens in organizations, we hire someone and we ask them very surface level questions.
Okay.
So we don't actually know who we're hiring, and then we've hired them. And we started this very expensive long-term relationship without really knowing who we're getting, and they don't know much about us. And because once you don't have that conversation early on, it's very hard to have it 2 years down the line. So it's a little bit like not knowing someone's name. If I don't know your name for one conversation, it's sort of fine. But if 2 years later I still don't know your name, it's really inappropriate for me to go, what's your name? I've only known you for 2 years, what's your name? So we wind up never having the conversations. So we stay at the surface level of what do you do? Have you met your targets? And that's kind of it.
Okay, and that's possibly why people don't enjoy going to work, really, because it's a space where we're not really seen.
Yeah.
We're just there to be worker ants.
Yeah, and we can do that. I mean, history has shown that we can do that. We can create organizations that do that. I think more and more those organizations will die out. So they've always died out, but I think the speed at which they'll die out is rapidly increasing. So the expression I often refer to dinosaurs. I have a huge dinosaur thing, where they made sense. Organizations running like that made sense in a different time. They don't make sense anymore, and either they are dead or they are dying. And unless they can adapt to this new way of processing, which is get committed people, because your job description will be out of date 6 months later. Yep. If people aren't comfortable with that, they're going to kill your organization.
I'm not sure if you noticed that there was a light bulb moment when you were talking about getting to know the people you work with. I don't know if you saw there was this reaction, because we've been chatting about millennials and what millennials want.
Yes.
And they were talking about how millennials want to be asked, how are you doing? What do you do outside of work? And yeah, you're saying that this is really about what we all want.
Yeah, sorry for anyone who talks about this in their talks. I hate the millennial conversation. I think it's really misplaced, because all of the things that are ascribed to millennials are things that every human being, they're the first generation who's thought I should ask for it.
Yeah, they're verbal.
But they're not the first ones to think that.
Okay.
You know, my parents who are in their 70s, it's not that they didn't want to have a voice, or they didn't know that was a thing you could ask for in an organization. So I think that's horribly misplaced. And it also, I think it leads into this thing where we look at people again with surface stuff. How old are you? And based on how old you are, I'm going to guess about what you want, as opposed to just saying, what do you want?
Yeah.
What are you excited about? What are you passionate about? Because, again, I work in academia. I am not a traditional academic. If people go, oh, well, you're an academic, so here's what you probably want, they're going to be right about some stuff and really wrong about other stuff. So I think it's getting past that surface stuff and just getting to know individuals.
That's so refreshing, because I was like quite uncomfortable with the concept of now I have to try and understand a whole different generation. It's important for me to understand what their trends are, what their needs are, what makes them tick. But I was like sitting there thinking, but do they take the time to get to know me?
Yeah.
Or is it all about what we want because now we have a voice?
Yeah.
So I'm starting to feel a little bit left out.
Yeah, 100%.
If truth be told.
Well, it's the co-creation, right? So it needs to be, this is where I'm coming from, this is where you're coming from. And it's not that either of those is right or wrong. It's just understanding that. So again, I always say I'm not afraid to step on someone's toes, but I want to know whose toes I'm stepping on and how hard I'm stepping. Right? It's not that you go around trying to make everyone happy. Yeah. Oh, I know you don't like this, so you don't have to do it. Sorry, the business needs this. You have to do it. but I understand that you don't like it, and I understand it's going to bother you, so I'm going to offer you a different support. I'm going to pitch it to you in a different way than someone else who I know is excited about that, and who also has to do it, but is going to be so thankful for the opportunity. The more I know that, it doesn't stop me from having to do it, you having to do it, but it makes it easier for you to understand why you have to do it. It makes me easier to understand why you're going to push back a little bit. It's just going to smooth all that process out.
I think what the thread between these conversations that we've been having is for us to understand the why.
Yeah.
And that's what they were saying about millennials. They need to understand the why. They
Yeah.
need to see where they fit in the grander scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I think that once again it really applies to all generations. It's how do I fit in? How relevant am I still, etc.
Yeah.
So your biggest, in terms of your teaching, you lecture, you speak around the world, you've been around the world. What is the greatest tip that you could share with all of us listening here today when it comes to finding the right people, but also getting to know them on a more, when I say personal level, I'm not talking about getting to know their bank details or their star sign.
Although if you can learn their bank details, I highly recommend it. It's a good way to,
Okay, but there's such a fine line. How do we know when it's too much or when it's not enough? Because especially when there's the opposite sex.
Yeah.
I know that in South Africa we're uncomfortable to engage with a male or a female because we don't want the wrong perception to be, we don't want them to think something differently.
100%.
So what do we do in that situation? It's so confusing.
So, I mean, I think it's the first conversation, I always say, if I came down and sat next to you on the bus, right, and I said, let me tell you about my values, right, that next stop is your stop. No matter if it's not or not, you're immediately, let me get out of here, this is, so creepy. So you don't want to start in a way where it's a hard conversation. You want to make it as easy. So I would say is when you're hiring someone, you've got a bunch of people in the room who all should know what the organization's values are, right? And if they don't, that's a problem with your hiring team, but that's a different issue. So it's not about me learning about you, it's about us learning about who's going to come onto the organization. So it's still a bit scary for them because it's one versus maybe 5 or 6, but it's not about, I'm trying to learn about you, it's about we're trying to learn about you.
Okay.
And if you establish it early on, then it makes sense for those types of conversations to be going on, because you'd say, oh, this is the kind of thing they talk about here. So they'll be expecting it, right? And so that makes it a little bit less weird. Now again, you don't want to come into my office, shut the door, tell me about your values, super creepy. Don't do it that way. But you can start to say, in groups, let's talk about this. I think the thinking partners, which is we did very briefly in there, is a really good way of people just exchanging that, because someone's sort of forcing you to do it, but it's a very non-threatening. You're going to say, they're going to say, so you're on equal ground. If you do it where it's not boss to subordinate, that removes some of the barriers to it. So it's just thinking about how do we start it in a non-threatening way. And the easier you make it to start having those conversations, the more common it comes to having those conversations, and then becomes less weird. So me talking to you about my values isn't about, oh, maybe he's trying to learn a little. It's like, no, we do this all the time.
Yeah.
We do it in groups, we do it as individuals, so it's not weird at all that he's talking about
So then
that.
does that start in the recruitment process?
Yeah.
You mentioned how that person will say, okay, this is how the company functions, this is the culture. So what kind of questions would we be asking somebody during the recruitment process? Is there anything in specific that we can maybe ask? I think that would be quite helpful.
100%. So I would say, if I don't get asked, if I'm going for an interview and I don't get asked this question, I will ask them, which is, what are your values? So every organization who's hiring should say to the person they're thinking about hiring, what are your values?
Really?
And if you've got a reasonable candidate, what they're going to tell you is probably, what's so weird? Mine are the same as your organization's values. That's so weird. I can start on Monday, right? So you want to get past that. So a really good thing to say is, one, what are your values? Because now you're having the conversation. And depending on the response, you can say, how have you lived your values?
Sure.
So if these really are their values, they've thought about them, they are a core of their life, and they should be able to rattle off a ton of stuff that fits in with their values, right? So one of my values is about excellence. So I can tell you all about the stuff I try to do to develop our programs, to develop how students are supported, because it's all about excellence. So I have all of these things ready to mind because those are my core values.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, how have you lived them? They go, well, technically, well, sort of. I mean, I guess you could say that's someone who is just repeating back your organization's values back to you. And to be fair, if you're going for a job interview and you ask that of the company and they do that, that's something to know. Because every organization now, if they have a website, somewhere on their About Us page will say, our values are whatever, right? Now, if I'm in an interview panel and I say, okay, there's 6 of you who work at this organization, what are the organizations? Now, I know what they are because I've looked at the website before I've come, but I'm curious if they know what they are. And so a lot of times you say, well, what are the organization's values? And they'll go, well, and you'll see them all looking at each other, desperate for the person who, it doesn't mean you shouldn't work there, but it means, okay, this part of their website, what does it really mean so where am I really going? And so I follow that up with, again, I'm very specific. Well, these are my values. This is what you're getting.
Wow,
and
that's quite assertive, that's confident.
And I stand behind it. But this is the start of a potential. They're going to give me, hopefully, a lot of money. They're going to give me insurance. They're going to relocate me. This is a sort of a serious relationship. So it's a little bit like first dates where people say, don't talk about politics, religion, sex, right? Because it's too, well, maybe not on the first date, but at some point, those are kind of important things, right? Like if someone's a Looney Tunes, you want to know early, not 6 months when you've invested, right? So I always think it's, you don't want to do it in a threatening way, but you say, okay, well, those are your values. Here's mine, so here's what you're going to get, because that's real. And that is what they're going to get. And you don't want them to be surprised when you suddenly start living your values. This is crazy. No, it's what we talked about.
Look, to be honest, I've come across many organizations who don't know their values. It's quite sad because they're not singing from the same hymn sheet, and so everybody's a little bit disjointed. And I think this is a great way to reintroduce it back. I mean, if you had to ask them, imagine asking in an interview, so what are your company's values? And I suppose in that way you'd be rest assured that you could align to that way of thinking.
Yeah, and it's just, like I said, it's knowing that from an earlier stage than a later stage. It doesn't mean it makes you 100% of your decision, but it gives you an insight. Okay, so just when I looked at the rest of your website, if I say, how are the financials? And your financials are terrible, and they say, well, we're not really sure, doesn't mean I don't want to work there, but I want to know that. So I think it's a really crucial part to understand what they're really about.
Because I know you gave a talk a bit earlier on. Yeah. So specifically, what was the key message in that talk?
So one,
and you can tell us all, because I'm not sure if we all
the
saw
purpose and values mission bit. So what I talk a lot about it when I teach and when I give talks is purpose, values, mission. Most organizations are fixated on mission, which is just what do we do? So on a day-to-day basis, what do we do? That's only important if you know the purpose. So purpose is why. Why is this organization here? The values, what's most important to the organization. And then you need to have a mission because I need to give you something to do. But what you do only matters in terms of living the values to help us get to our purpose.
Okay.
So in most organizations, people are just running around doing their jobs. And they're very busy, and they're getting things done. But if you ask them, how does that fit into the overarching, they'll sort of go, no, I just have to do this, and maybe it's my KPIs, maybe it's my promotion criteria, but it's not tied into anything else that they can actually see.
So it's like asking an 11-year-old, how was your day? And they go, fine.
Yeah.
We don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, how much, we're currently reviewing our MBA program. So our MBA program is really good. But if the GSB says the GSB is an institution that is, our why is creating people who are accounting specialists, well then it's a really bad MBA because it's not geared around that, right? It doesn't look like that because that's not our purpose. Our purpose is around social innovation, social entrepreneurship, values-based leadership, and emerging markets. So our MBA should look like that. But if it doesn't look like that in isolation, it's a good MBA. But it's a really good MBA if we say this is what we're about, and you look at the MBA and go, yeah, and their MBA is totally fixated on that.
So are you saying that our job roles are changing? We know this, but how significantly are they changing? I mean, now the focus is on like social interaction, is on how do you engage, is how do you connect? Is that relevance? Is that...
anyone in here who has a job description that's more than 6 months old is out of date. I don't know, do people, how many of you know your job description, just out of curiosity? Do you actually know what, you got the half hand. You were in my talk, I got the half hand, right. So most of us don't know what they are, but when you get it, that job's irrelevant probably 6 months later. Some of that stuff will still be there, but a lot of it will be fundamentally different. And in 2 years or 3 years' time, it'll be completely obsolete. So why are we writing a job description on these specific mission tasks? Well, what we should say is we want someone who's committed to, so if you work in sales, we want someone who's committed to growing the business. That's your job description. Getting into minutia is going to be irrelevant because we're going to use social media in different ways. We're going to use AI in different ways. We're going to use machine learning. So at some point, for a lot of us, our jobs aren't going to be about doing that job. It's going to be about supporting or designing the AI or the machine learning that helps to do that bit, and that's going to become our job. It's still around sales or marketing or whatever the job is, but that job description is going to be completely different.
So then what does an HR professional look for in a CV? Because I think the basic way of when they're looking for individuals is like this very long key competencies, and then they list all these, it's like tick, tick, no. So what do we...
So, I mean, what I talk about is what you want to get is someone who connects with the values and the purpose of the organization.
Okay.
So not about...
Is it that easy? You need the qualification.
To some extent.
Okay.
No, well, and this is, so I would say, is once there's someone who's committed to the purpose and the values of the organization, you know that they're going to be excited about doing stuff. And if you're excited about doing stuff, you're going to learn just naturally, because you're going to say, oh, what about this? You're going to drive the learning process as opposed to organization forcing you to learn new skills, right? The second thing is you need to hire people who are committed to learning. That doesn't necessarily mean degrees. I have a bunch of them, right? I know a lot of people who have I have a doctorate, I know people who have doctorates who I don't think have learned anything new in years, possibly decades in some cases, right? They're not really committed to learning in a way that is fundamental to organizations moving forward. So yes, a degree might be an indication of that, but I'm actually more interested in beyond the traditional degrees, it's how else have they developed their own learning? So have they taken non-credit classes? So if you're on edX or something like that, or Coursera, I took this class, there's no credit attached to it, there's no degree attached to it, but I wanted to learn about this, or I went to this conference, or I went to, I'm looking for someone who is constantly showing that I'm open to these new ideas. I'm not necessarily going to become an expert in there, but I'm open to learning new stuff. And again, that might be a degree, but there's all kinds of other ways you can ask, how have you developed your skills? How have you developed your interests? What are your key interests? That's going to tell me more about, not on day one, but on year two, than what degrees are, right?
Okay, that's really awesome, because it really speaks to, once again, and I said it earlier on, we need to develop this mindset of lifelong learning. We cannot think that now we are one job role or job description and that's it. Because like you said, I mean, when I'm 70, what am I going to be doing? I can't wait to see what I'll be doing. I know that I have to be relevant. I know that I will still be working. And thank goodness, what a wonderful opportunity to still be working so that my brain is functioning. And I mean, I don't want to retire at 65. What am I going to do? We all have this mindset that we're going to retire at 65 and we're going to, tend the garden. I don't know. Maybe some of us would want to, but the reality, it's...
Luckily, with climate change, there won't be any gardens, so you don't have to worry about that's all going to be...
So what will we be
doing? Too depressing? Too harsh? Sorry.
Just a little bit. At least we'll be intelligent.
That's right. Some kind of intelligence. But yeah, I mean, the nature of it is just, I say, my CV is a mess of stuff, but I know what my purpose is, so all of those things make sense along that. It makes sense to move within that space of creating learning to make the world a better place, because I get what my purpose is. So that means I've been a teacher, and that makes sense. It means I work for the teaching union. That makes sense. It means I work for a nonprofit. That makes sense. And I think that's the mindset you want to have is, am I doing things that I'm passionate about? What I do should change all the time, right? How I teach. My MBA classes flipped. I record all of my lectures online in advance, so they're available to students at the start of the year, online, and all of my slides are available online at the start of the year in advance. So my class time is just discussion. What did you guys think about this? Is this right? Where did we go wrong with this? So how I've taught has changed because technology has changed. And I'm changing, technology has changed, expectations for students have changed. So if I kept doing the same stuff, maybe they wouldn't fire me. But I'm certainly not going to be as good as I could be in that role. But I'm committed, again, because it's my passion, I'm going to keep developing and taking those risks. And
we need to acknowledge that as human beings, we need to evolve as with the changing times, because going back to what you said right in the beginning, then we just become a dinosaur.
Yeah. Well, and the example I was using is, like most people, this isn't a value, but most of you want to look stylish, fashionable, stylish. Now, think back to 15 years ago. Think about what you were wearing 15 years ago.
I had a perm once.
Would you want to wear it now? Probably not. Now, at the time, you probably thought, looking good, right? I know I did, and I see the pictures, and it is not true. But so now we realize as the
We've
times
changed.
change, we need to change.
Yeah.
Okay, in this space, in this time, I still want to look stylish. That has remained consistent, but how I do that is
Yeah.
different because the world's changed. I've changed. What I do has changed.
Yeah.
So I should change along
And
with
we
it.
absolutely need to embrace change. So
Yeah.
Tim, that was absolutely amazing. We could have chatted for much longer. Our time is up. We've
Yeah.
got this red flashing light.
I
going,
went over my
up.
time there too, so I'm yeah.
So thank you very much for an insightful conversation and just teaching us how to be a little bit more flexible,
Yeah.
looking at ways in which we can connect to people on a deeper level and to be lifelong learners.
Yeah, pleasure. Absolutely.
I want to be high five. I'm accessing
High
my
five.
inner millennial.
This is taking me back to my American roots right there. It's a very
Ah,
American
okay.
thing, the very high five. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Tim.
much. Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.